2024. Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Headlines with me, Leah Ganesan. You're tuned in to Southside FM's have reports, discussions, and interviews on the stories that matter to you. As elections are fast approaching, there are issues we must consider other than just who we will vote for. It is 12:32 on the
It
dot on
is
the 22nd of
12:32 on the
March
dot on the
2020.
22nd of March 2022 on the dot on the 22nd of March 12:32 on the dot on the 22nd of March.
Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Headlines with me,
Good
Leah
afternoon and
Ganesan. You're
welcome to
tuned
Beyond the
into Southside FM's Current Affairs program, where we have reports, discussions, and interviews on the stories that matter to you. As elections are fast approaching, there are issues we must consider other than just who we will vote for. One of the main concerns now is political violence. Political tension may be building up in the leading up to 29th of May. The general public now has the responsibility to become part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. But before we get into that, let me tell you about the headlines and features we have lined up for today's program. Coming up in Beyond the Headlines, the South African government has announced that threats and intimidation will not be tolerated during the elections. And the Umkhonto we Sizwe party is facing allegations of occupying a hijacked building in Johannesburg. And the ANC and the IFP are trying to make amends. Later on, we'll be speaking to advocate Saber Ahmed Jazbeh, who will discuss the incitement of violence among political parties. And as always, we'll round it up with your economic report and, of course, some top sports stories. To start you off, just off the back of Human Rights Day, the South African government has announced that threats and intimidation will not be tolerated during the elections. Ramaphosa has warned that threats, intimidation, and undemocratic actions by people who want to undermine the electoral process will not be tolerated. Speaking at the Human Rights Day commemoration in Sharpeville on Thursday, the president said the regularity, peacefulness, fairness, and integrity of the elections are achievements that must be dutifully protected. This is such a relevant address to have had given the current political climate. The upcoming elections look to be the most highly contested elections in a long time. The state and trajectory of the country and the current government doesn't look promising to a number of citizens, and it's not convincing them to keep voting for the ANC. We have seen the gap to the ANC shrink significantly since the last elections. To put that point in numbers, for you. Earlier this month, Bloomberg released a report showing that support for the ANC has fallen below 40%. So, opposition parties such as the DA and Action SA have the common goal now of loosening the grip of the ANC on the country. So, the multi party charter, which is a coalition of various parties, looks certain to usher in a coalition government after the elections. In the midst of all that competition at the top, tension is bound to filter down to members of the general public who support opposing parties. So we have seen fights breaking out here and there between members and supporters of different political parties. We've also seen certain political parties themselves attempting to incite violence this year. So it's good to see that an important day was used not just to talk about the history of the holiday, but to talk about right now, to address directly the issue of intimidation and threats with regards to politics. So, moving on from that, the Umkhonto we Sizwe party, which has been keeping newsrooms across the country very busy, is now facing allegations of occupying a hijacked building in Johannesburg. Some reports say that the City of Johannesburg's Group Forensic Investigation Services is investigating the party and those allegations. The building was previously used by a non governmental organization that ran a drug rehabilitation program for young people. The organization says they were recently thrown out of the building. MK has denied occupying a boardroom space rather in the building. The party's spokesperson, Ntlamulo Ndlela, says the MK would never involve itself in illegal activities, especially not hijacking a building. She says people need to understand that rumors will surface close to the election just to paint certain parties in a negative light. Now, whether MK is occupying the hijacked building or not can't be confirmed until after the investigation is completed, of course. However, the point made about rumors being spread close to the elections is a good reminder to the general public not to believe everything you see, hear, and read. Be sure to do your own research in addition to what you're consuming, especially before sharing the information with other people. It's your civic duty to be responsible with your freedom of speech and your freedom of expression. So, especially now, it's such a crucial time. Make sure that you are thinking twice before posting and sharing certain stories. Moving on from that, the African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal has requested to meet with the Inkatha Freedom Party to discuss how peace and stability can be achieved in the province. There have been concerns of increasing political tension as the country heads to the polls soon. The latest concerns were sparked by an incident where ANC provincial chairperson Siboniso Duma interrupted the Zulu traditional prime minister Thulasizwe Buthelezi, who is also an IFP member, while speaking at an event last week Saturday. The ANC and the IFP are perpetual rivals. The parties often butt heads, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, which is such a highly contested province for them both. It's good to see an olive branch now being extended. We hope that both parties will actually follow through on this and try to avoid an escalation of tensions. And so, on this topic, of course, we have advocate Sabir Ahmed Jazbai to talk to us on the incitement of political violence and how we can avoid feeding into it. Mr. Jazbai, thank you so much for joining us today.
listening and watching us in our actions. And therefore, the first thing we need can offend what will offend people. Now, there's a fine line between debate and diatribe, and it's the latter that essentially is a cause of problem. For example, if you recall, in the case of the Phoenix, I'm using Phoenix as a paradigm here. In the case of Phoenix, it was the words of a few individuals that went on public that instigated action of the nature that the of the nature every South African citizen got to sit down and understand what he or she collectively wants. Work toward that goal. Find solutions to problems rather than finding problems to solutions.
Very important, yes. And political violence on the back of what you've just said, with elections approaching, political tension is bound to escalate. So closer to elections now, is there any advice that you can give to the general public to prevent themselves from being used as devices in political attacks and political games against supporters of opposition parties?
Oh, yes. I think, first of all, I need to address, I hope this is going to be aired so that politicians, loud-mouthed, foul-mouthed politicians, hear my message. And it is very clear. It is the politicians that are largely responsible for the instigation and the violence that causes. If you remember, a few weeks ago, there was a politician who on air said that if his party is not doesn't win the election or is not on a ballot box, there's going to be violence. That kind of language is not encouraged. That kind of language falls foul of the Electoral Act and falls foul of the Intimidation Act. Now, people like that have to be called to account. No matter what they can justify themselves, it is very, very poorly couched. So therefore, every South African got to be calm, got to be collected, got to be educated. We must not listen only to what the politicians tell us. Rather, we must be in a position to make up our own minds here. This is critical. We've got to be calm, we've got to be collected, we've got to know what we want, we've got to know whether that is achievable without any violence, without any threat whatsoever. And what has happened in this particular instance I spoke to you about is an abomination. It impacts. Remember, the world is listening, the world is watching as to who says what, and therefore it's going to affect our future as a South African nation.
And just finally, I think for people to really understand why this is such an important issue, they need to understand the impact of what could happen if there is, for example, a riot. We are just picking ourselves up from the damage that was done by COVID, by the floods, and by the riots. So what would happen? What would be the political, the social, the economic impact of another riot or a situation like that happening again in KwaZulu-Natal, which is a hotspot for issues like this?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and I must thank you for that. But at the same time, remember there are young provocateurs that are walking the streets and are occupying very important critical space that affect our future welcome. And therefore, we need to be careful as to who these people are. We need to identify these people. We need to find, we need to work as a community rather than as individuals. Now, like for example, the area in which I stay in is largely dominated by cross pollination of cultures, and therefore we find what is the commonality between us. What we need light, water, we need security, that kind of stuff. Rather than working individually, we work as a collective so that we identify each other. Remember, South Africa belongs to all, not only Africans, belongs to all who live in it. And this is critical, and our constitution says that we need to guard against agents provocateurs who use the newspapers, who use the radio waves to stir violent reaction on the part of very angry people. Remember, South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. We have an unemployment rate of 38%. Don't believe what the propaganda tell you. 38% of South Africans are unemployed. Almost 60% of the youth unemployed. We need to identify that, work towards that, make sure that our politicians understand that what we want rather than what they think we want. It must be achievable, and it must be done in a nuanced way. The question remains, as 30 years down the line, are we mature enough as a 30-year-old South African nation, or are we still floundering like headless chicken after 30 years of oppression? 30 years of oppression. 30 years of oppression. 30 years of oppression. 30 years.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jazbai. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to move on to the economic report now. A short while ago, gold was selling at $2,201.65 a fine ounce. A barrel of Brent crude costs $85.20. $1 is trading at 18 Rand 73 cents. 1 British pound is 23 Rand 92. €1 is 20 Rand 44. And the dirham is trading at 5 Rand 10 cents. It's currently 4 rupees 44 in Indian rupees to the rand and 2 rupees 46 in Mauritian rupees to the rand. The price for one Bitcoin is currently trading at $66,729.90. And that will take us quickly over to our sport. The first thing we're going to look at today is actually some breaking news for you. We're looking at athletics. The last 7 kilometers of the Comrades Marathon route has been changed to accommodate some ongoing roadworks. Comrades Race and Operations Manager Anne Ashworth says the route used will be similar to that used in the 2013 and 2015 races. Ashworth also says that the race's iconic Toyota Mile will start at the intersection of King Edward Avenue and Allen Payton Drive, where runners will turn left and then right, passing Comrades Marathon House within the last kilometer of the race. The entrance to this year's finish straight will be off Surrey Road, with the results that runners will no longer need to pass through the tunnel beneath the Scottsville racetrack. With 78 days to Comrades Race Day, Ashworth has advised runners to make their way to the start of the race early to avoid traffic caused by roadworks. Moving on to cricket now. The Cricket South Africa Hubs Challenge is set to make a return today, showcasing young talent emerging from the country's cricket hubs. The first leg of the tournament is set to be hosted at Willowmore Park in Benoni, starting today through to Monday. It will feature 8 teams, including Easterns, Lions, Northwest, Dolphins, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Titans, and KZN Inland. The competition will intensify with the second leg in George from the 28th to the 31st of March. 2024 CSA Hubs Challenge will see teams battle it out in 50-over matches, giving a perfect platform for emerging cricketers to showcase their abilities. CSA Chief Officer Poletsi Moseki says string talent and providing opportunities to aspiring cricketers. Moving on, national soccer team coach Hugo Broos has challenged overseas-based players to offer more quality in order to be selected to play for the team. Broos has used locally based players for the majority of his tenure as Bafana Bafana coach. Bafana Bafana played a very competitive game with Andorra last night in a FIFA series match. The South African team created a number of chances throughout the game. It could have been their game, but it just wasn't their day. The match ended in a draw, with each side taking home a point. Bafana Bafana will face Algeria in another friendly match on Tuesday. Let's hope we can win that one. Lastly, Malaysia has retracted their bid to host the 2026 Commonwealth Games. The Malaysian government has announced that they will not host the Games due to cost. The decision made at a cabinet meeting chaired by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim comes after the withdrawal of the Australian state of Victoria last year. Commonwealth Games Federation is struggling to find a host for the next Games. They have offered other potential hosts £100 million to replace Victoria, which also pulled out due to the high cost of hosting the event. Singapore is now assessing the feasibility of the CGF's proposal. That is the end of our current affairs program for today. A special thanks to our production team. That's Ashok Ramsarup, Manik Thor, Rishali Subalak, and Dishagan Sitarprasad. And most importantly, thank you for tuning in today. I now leave you in the very capable hands of JK. Thank you.